Hello, everyone. Well, Dominic, it's great to see you. We've worked together for quite a while. And, even as we bring in Carter here in a second, the three of us are all involved in C4 UHC, which is really working between vendor credentialing organizations, providers, and suppliers to kind of bring standardization. And so I've really enjoyed working with you in multiple capacities because obviously you're our big user with green security as well. But honestly, we've enjoyed a relationship for quite some time. You have a very well running program at Mayo. We're really honored to have Mayo Clinic utilizing green security. And as a national leader, when it comes to vendor credentialing, you've had a chance because you've been owning this program since the beginning. You've had a chance to really experience all the insights, lessons learned. We've worked on projects together. We've developed integrations. There's a whole host of things that we could talk about. But I'd rather start at the beginning with when you think about where vendor credentialing is today. We've solved some problems, but what's still not working the way everybody thinks it should? And where do you see some fragmentation that might be causing some headaches?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was thinking earlier, we're on about 6.5 years that we've been working together. So thank you very much for inviting me and having me, and talking about the different, biggest headaches or pain points that we see from, on the provider side for credentialing is, in working with the various suppliers, leading into the rest of our conversation, just the inconsistent requirements between the different health systems and the confusion that can create with the different suppliers. I think Mickey set it up perfectly just on our end, the sea of data that's out there. Green security can provide us, data from any angle we want, but it's how do we efficiently look through that sea of data to find those enhancements, to find efficiencies and so on. Locally, we're always looking for ways to not burden the practice. And I'll say this again later, but the practices are boots on the ground. They're the ones who are seeing the suppliers that when a supplier or when a rep shows up and they're not compliant, they have to make that determination on, do I cancel the case? Especially in the OR, what do I do from here? And so how can we give them easier visibility, and as well as just know who's not supposed to be there, to stop that solicitation that we all, live through on a daily basis. The other challenge that I think we all struggle with, including myself, is really credentialing is like an other duty as assigned. It's not a sole responsibility of any one person, or it's not a sole responsibility in somebody's job in many health systems, including mine. In fact, in my case, this responsibility has followed me through 5 different positions over the years, all within supply chain. So it just kind of sticks with me wherever I move. And so it really presents a challenge to truly manage a program without having various partners and integrations, which once again we'll come back to later.
Well, Dominic, the reason it keeps following you wherever you go is because you're doing a great job running the program. And so let's continue the discussion, Dominic, on your side. But I can say, I think one of the things, while Carter's working on audio that we've talked a lot about at C4 UHC is, I think some of the frustrations that come up a lot of times with the suppliers is, there's different requirements from one organization to another. And, we've been working on standards, and there's an ANSI standard for those requirements. But Carter's also been a medical device rep. And I think that's one of the things is like, because of that variation, there's really nobody pulling that all together and starting to reduce, the number of different types of credentials, the acceptance criteria. I think leaning towards a standard can really help with that. I think also to take a broader look and tie into what Mickey was talking about with vendor operations is just all these different point solutions. And so a lot of times
Mhm.
reps just don't know, like, hey, how do I get scrubs at Mayo Clinic? And is it different in one part of the country than another part of the country? And so, for somebody that's a national rep who might still be supporting clinical cases as like sort of an expert or a lead, they're still going to have to access clinical areas and all of that, but there may be some variation of policies and procedures, sometimes within a large organization, but definitely even just one health system across town from another. And I think that can be a bit of a challenge too. All right. So Dominic, let's talk
Yep.
about standards and really how those standards come into play in a leadership role? Like, why did you get involved into setting those standards? What was the benefit to Mayo Clinic, right? Because what I just outlined is more benefits to the suppliers and the supplier organizations. But for you to spend time on top of your other duties as assigned doing the credentialing managing, you're getting involved in this project. And I know how much time you've put into it just from hours and meetings and providing
Mhm.
insights. Why get involved from the provider side in setting the standard?
Right. I mean, our involvement with C4EHC is, I mean, it's part of who Mayo is. Mayo strives to be at the forefront of any kind of innovation, as well as one of our taglines is to be a category of one. So we really wanted to have a seat at the table in really improving that credentialing process. And really it's about streamlining that so that when a supplier and we get to the ANSI standards and C4UHC, it's so that when a supplier, ideally is registering, it's the same requirements, or at least the ANSI standard is here's the maximum that will be required of you. As a health system, you can agree to have lesser requirements, but if a supplier has all of these and they, would have like a packet, so to speak, when they register with different VCOs or green security, that it's the same across the board so that it streamlines it, it drives compliance. But ultimately, when you drive compliance, it's to that end goal is ensuring that we have patient safety and we know who is on our campus and why they're here. And so that's really the biggest thing. And in regards to C4EHC with, with our involvement in there, I can personally say that, it's been a very pleasant takeaway that the different suppliers that are involved, in the movement, they truly want to be a partner in this process. They want it to be streamlined. They want it to be efficient, probably even more than us, we could say, because they want providers to focus on patient care, their supplies. They're in the business of sales and they want to be able to get in, take care of the patient and move on to their other responsibilities that they have, or maybe other cases, in the same hospital in that facility, or maybe in another facility or another health system if it's a big town. So it's definitely been well worth the time.
That's great. And Carter, I know you're back. There's two
I'm
of you.
back.
One of you is back, but I've been involved enough with you in the organization to, I think, at least tee up some of the considerations. But the one that I think I'd like you to speak to before we kind of move on in the discussion is really around like what the C4UHC has been through a transformation. Like originally it was a standards effort, got the ANSI standard, approved, and now we're looking back at it. What lessons did we learn, et cetera? But I think it's also completely evolved. And yeah, I'd love for you to kind of talk about the strategic shift and why now.
Yeah, I think, the why now, let me give a quick background on me. I've been 26 years in med device. So I've been in and out of the ORs. I've seen vendor credentialing develop from the beginning, from when we used to just take the papers, put our information into the file cabinet. That was how it all started. And then I've seen it progress. And so from the rep point of view, it's very fragmented and every hospital has different policies. Every hospital has different requirements, and that's very confusing for us. So my involvement with C4UHC and becoming the executive director is I saw that there's really value in what C4UHC is trying to do and streamline this and make it really, patient safe so that we have commonality between all of the facilities. So that's why I was recently at the CMS Quality and Safety Convention. And that's where this really comes down from a rep perspective, because we're non-hospital employees entering a care facility. Our value and what we're doing as a rep or vendor is not on the same alignment as a hospital with quality and safety. Unfortunately, I need to put it very direct. As a rep, you're selling a product, right? Vendor credentialing really brings together that quality and safety metric of why we're there in the room and allowed to be there. But the challenge that we face and why C4UHC is really important today is evaluating the standard so that we can have consistency, not just at facilities like Mayo, but if we can enter a facility like Mayo and other facilities in other states and having that same level of understanding, it makes it easier for the vendors to understand that. And that's really what this is about. So we're trying to make that alignment.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that we're doing at Green as well to lean into the supplier relationship, and our involvement with C4 UHC was, kind of our foot forward and really messaging out like we understand that from the vendor credentialing component, we're leaning in and broadening that out with the vendor operations concept. But just from vendor credentialing, I don't think the suppliers have had an experience with other VCOs that they're taking an interest in sort of making the vendor rep and the vendor company. Because there's a lot of companies who have assigned people or person or people that are essentially managing the entire workforce. And so it's a really large volume. And so I think we've done a lot of good work in making that easier too. And I think that's refreshing. And C4UHC is very much aligned, and our involvement is very much aligned with trying to accomplish something that works for both sides and just makes everything work more smoothly, less headaches. And you can know that when people are coming on site, that they're compliant, and their speed to getting registered and approved and compliant is going to be faster. And so I think a lot of the feedback that we get participating with C4UHC is very helpful in that. As we're talking about vendor operations and we're talking about all these point solutions that vendors use, I'd like to start talking about integrations and integration strategy. And so a lot of that comes from just technology in general and how the technology can change behavior. And I'd like to position that to you, Dominic, to kick us off in this section of the conversation is, it's one thing to have data, it's another thing to have usable data. And then you might have technology, but you're not just looking to track what's happening. You're not just looking to track activity. You want to have some insights around how the program's performing. So can you lead us in, maybe coming off of the idea that technology is not just simply a data capture mechanism?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I mentioned before, the sea of data and you can get it, but do you have time to actually do anything with it? To reach out to suppliers or reps or even internally within your facilities to educate and especially the practice. There are key points with vendor credentialing while their focus is on patient care, and that's where their expertise is, not looking to see if, a badge is current or somebody's, registered. And so that's where we've really leaned into, different integrations. For example, at our Jacksonville location, we use the appointment feature within Green Security. And we've had a lot of success with that. And the key there is that our security office, which is right across the hallway from the kiosk, they have a screen that mirrors in their office so they can see when someone is approved or not approved, along with the appointment calendar to know where they're supposed to go, who their contact is. And so that data is right at their fingertips. I'm not going to hide the fact that that's a great use case. That's not across our entire health system because, every building is set up that way from a flow and so on. And but that's a great piece of technology that we've integrated at that location. Additionally, with that, we do use rep scrubs. And we have our settings for rep scrubs where the scrubs do not vend if the individual or that rep is not checked in. And so that's where we really start to get into some different data. Naturally, we're talking about our OR reps, our level 3 reps in this case, but it allows reps that data, rep scrub, if someone tries to dispense scrubs, they're denied because they didn't check in yet. They can go back, check in, and then dispense scrubs. But if they're never able to successfully resolve that issue, rep scrubs automatically sends them an email saying, hey, we see you tried to dispense scrubs. You were unable to for this reason. And here's what you need to do. Your credentials were not up to speed. So that gives the rep kind of that ping to let them know, we see you. We know that you were here. We know that you weren't compliant. And so that takes, I mean, I look at that as automation for us as, as a provider, that we're letting the rep know that we see them. And that's key in behavior. If they think that they're anonymous and under the radar, they're not going to change their behavior because they don't have to. And so that's very helpful in seeing our compliance go up. Naturally, the scrubs themselves is a visual indicator to the practice as to who's compliant. And in an educational facility that Mayo is, it lets them know who's actually a Mayo employee and who's not in some cases. When you're dealing with residents and students and so on, they don't always know. And so that also helps with solicitation. If someone is there with the rep scrubs, that's a different color, the red bouffant cap, the whole works, they know who they're talking to. And if they start talking about products and supplies, They know they can stop that conversation anytime. So the other piece that I wanted to mention is we utilize the mobile check-ins with green security as well. And it's really twofold. One, it's a great business continuity plan. If our computer system goes down at Mayo for some reason, or we lose power and so on, they can still check in using their phone and Wi-Fi or their cellular network based off the location. The other piece is we have so much construction going on at Mayo at our main sites. The kiosks get removed. Facilities isn't the greatest at communicating that this entire wing is going to get gutted. And I usually find out after the fact that a computer is no longer there for a kiosk. And I don't even know where it is anymore to get it back. So that mobile check-in has been key to help us keep that, be able to still have that ability for green security and a backup plan when something sideways happens. And then very cognizant trying to stay on task here for time. But the other integration that we're really leaning into right now, and it's a very new project, is we're looking at utilizing the RFID badges that green security provides. So we're really excited about the efficiencies there. For one thing, it's reducing the administrative burden of needing employees to open doors and escort the reps. Naturally, this is in a very controlled environment. Reps that we've know are coming and are approved, so it's not the entire population, but it allows them to open doors, get into the locker room, and go through the doors that they're allowed to go through independently. And I'm really hoping that a byproduct of this will also help integrate the reps more seamlessly into our teams. So reps want to be part of the teams, especially, this group are the reps that are coming 4 days a week. They might as well be employees at the hospital. They know everybody, they're there all the time. Let's give them the access on their badges so that they can get in the doors and they don't need to piggyback and so on. But the key with we use a lot of contractor badges. The idea of using the RFID badges, we can limit that access to business hours or just around their appointment and not 24/7 like a lot of our contractor badges are. And so, we create solutions for bad actors. This is one of those cases. When they're dropping off trays at midnight because they have a contractor badge and they're not supposed to be there and the tray goes missing, you know, this is reducing a lot of that ability to even occur. So,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, I just want to call that out. That contractor badges, there's no connection to compliance, and a lot of hospitals do issue
mhm,
contractor badges or badges to reps that are coming in after hours, for trauma cases as such. So, and something else that you said, just around, automating that compliance. I mean, I was a nurse. I can tell you, we weren't trained in conflict resolution. I might have known the rep from high school that's coming in. And so getting those data points back to the owner who may not be in the department and raising that up is also, to your point, like, hey, we can see you, we know you're here. And then also just proactively guiding them so that at some point it's not when a surveyor is on site and then the rep really gets in trouble for it.
Yeah.
There can be that proactive communication around
right.
that compliance monitoring. So, but where do you see adoption still breaking down when it comes to technology or execution of that technology application?
So let me bring it back from the rep perspective, because as Dominic said, might as well be an employee. You're there 4 days a week. And that does happen. But for us on the rep side, we're working at multiple hospitals, sometimes daily. And so it needs to be very quick for us to get in, get out, and change. And so that's where the challenge comes for us. That's why we're delivering trays late at night, sometimes in the middle of the night, because we're moving those trays around. So, an RFID badge so that we get access at set times. It's really how you set up this from the beginning when you have the contract with the vendor and setting the rules, because we do want to be part of the team. And the reality is we're there by invitation only. That's the reality. But you have to set those requirements from the beginning. And the one explanation when we were talking about rep scrubs, I actually love rep scrubs. I think it identifies who we are, but there's been a bad stigma about the red hat. The red hat is really our acceptance at the facility, and that needs to be explained better. That identification of who you are is allowing you in so that you can be identified. So it's important, because when I was a trauma rep, it was important that the team identify me quickly. Hey, Carter, get into this room. We need you right now, because of speed. Elective surgery is different. So you have to set up those requirements. So things like RFID chips, things like rep scrubs where I'm changing because I don't want to bring infection from one hospital to another is really important. The gap that's missing is explaining why these things are important. The reps look at it as this is an additional cost to me. Well, it's an additional cost to the hospital if I take scrubs from one facility, wear them into another. But they don't think that way. And we have to take a step back and realign and explain that and make a very distinct positive association with the red bouffant. So I hope I answered that real quick.
Yeah, no, you did. And we'll just leap off of that around
Yep.
something that you've brought up to me, which is, it's about patient safety. I think hospitals see that to an extent, but I think vendors maybe have not really understood the patient safety, concerns around compliance for healthcare always, because it's just not their perspective, right? And so can you illuminate on that, like why that sometimes the alignment on patient safety might not be there, between both users of a vendor credentialing platform?
Yeah, let me, I'm going to be very, very direct here. We're measured on quota. We're measured on sales. We're not measured on quality and patient safety metrics. So if I bring in a surgical tray and I'm setting it up and I don't bring IFUs and that doesn't get cleaned properly and a patient acquires an infection, but yet I make President's Club and I'm off on a trip celebrating this and the hospital is dealing with a patient that has an infection, we're not on the same metric. And so I learned this back in 2017 when I had University of Connecticut sterile processing said, Carter, you're a great rep. You do everything, to a T, but you need to think better on how you move things around. We were never trained on that. So there's gaps in those little things, scrubs. And that's why I'm saying scrubs are such a big deal, because when we would wear blue scrubs from one hospital to another and not change them, there's an infection risk. So there's a lot of these aspects that we can do better on in our industry. And it's really, taking that and aligning it to the quality and safety measures through CMS. And that's CMS is asking for that. And I think we have to bring that to the table here with C4UHC and introduce that within the standard and make that as a metric for reps, because we do have an impact when we're setting up and attending surgery.
All right, 2 minutes, 2 quick hitters. Dominic, for you, what does leadership need to do? What is the part that they play in helping these standards really stick and get movement forward?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, no integration happens, nothing happens without, the practice leadership on board with that. But also it's spending the time with the different work areas, meeting with surgery every once in a while, whether it's yearly or even a little bit more, just to know who the players are, who the leaders are, so that they're reinforcing the reason why compliance is important, understanding why the need is there. It's not there to slow them down or be a burden, but then also at the very least, as you said, for the surveyors, it's a joint commission compliance standard that we follow our policies internally at Mayo. Or really any health system. Additionally, the other leadership part that Carter kind of mentioned is having that partnership with your contracting area. We have verbiage, we have registration language in our contracts, and when we do have pain points or bad actors, contracting is a partner in getting that resolved as well. So
All right, 2 seconds, Carter. Tell everybody how they can get involved with C4UHC, and then we'll wrap.
Yes, please reach out to me. We can talk to your reps on these topics so that they do understand. It's really about bringing suppliers and providers together. So I'm happy to, have that conversation. I see both sides and I can be a voice to that. So please reach out. We want to get everybody involved in the standards, and it's really important that we do that.
yeah,
All right,
we'd love to have more
C4UH.
providers at the table. So for
Yes,
sure.
we need
Yes,
more
definitely need
providers.
more providers. C4UHC.org. And feel free to reach out to anybody that contact with at Green Security, and we can get you pointed in the right direction. I want to thank you both so much for the conversation today. Carter, it was great to see both of you.
Thank you.